You can walk away if you want. But I don't give up that easily. You'll come around. They always do. She didn't stop, didn't look back. But her heart was beating faster than it should have. Over the next week, he kept showing up. At her hotel. At the hospital. At a charity auction in Paris where she was supposed to speak. Always with that same calm, assured presence, as though the entire world bent to accommodate him. And each time, he'd offer the same words. My mother needs you. Name your price. And each time, she'd answer the same way. No. But it became harder and harder to ignore him. Because Elliot Nightwind wasn't just a man with connections. He was a storm, dark, relentless, impossible to ignore. And when she finally agreed, if only to get rid of him, she thought it would be just another case. She was wrong. Because Elliot didn't just want her skills. He wanted her. All of her. One night, after she examined his mother and confirmed she could operate, he cornered her outside the hospital. You're not what I expected, he said. She crossed her arms. What were you expecting? Someone colder. Someone untouchable. Someone who didn't flinch when a man like me walked into the room. She tilted her head. And? His smile was slow. Dangerous. And instead, he murmured, I find myself wondering what it would take to make you look at me the way you used to look at him. Her breath caught, but she recovered quickly. You're imagining things, she said lightly. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. No, he said. I'm just getting started. And in that moment, under the pale streetlight, she realized something terrifying. Cale had broken her heart. But Elliot Nightwind was going to set it on fire. New Moon. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4, The Devil's Request. Lyra sat at the long polished table of Elliot's private dining room, her fingers curled lightly around a glass of water she had yet to drink. She hadn't wanted to come here. And yet, here she was, seated across from him like a lamb in the lion's den. Elliot Nightwind lounged at the head of the table, his jacket discarded over the back of his chair, his white shirt rolled to the elbows, revealing strong forearms and a watch worth more than most people made in a year. But it wasn't his wealth or his looks that made the air between them thick and heavy. It was his gaze. Unflinching. Focused. Devouring. He didn't look at her the way Cale did, with quiet pity or cold indifference. No, Elliot looked at her like she was already his, and he was merely biding his time until she admitted it. The meal had been exquisite, though she barely tasted it. When dessert was cleared, he finally spoke. I want you to move into my house, he said simply. Lyra froze, her brows lifting. Excuse me? You heard me, he replied, resting his chin in his hand. I want you here. Where I can see you. Where I can protect you. She set her glass down deliberately. That's not necessary, she said. Your mother is stable. The surgery is scheduled. There's no reason for me to stay here. Elliot's lips curved into something halfway between a smile and a snarl. You think this is about my mother? He murmured. Her heartbeat picked up, but her expression remained cool. Isn't it? He leaned forward then, his voice low and dangerous. You don't get it yet, do you? I don't just want your hands in my operating room, Lyra. I want you. In my world. In my house. In my bed. The words stole the air from her lungs. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. When she finally found her voice, it came out hoarse. You're out of your mind. Maybe, he admitted easily. But I get what I want. Always. Lyra stood, pushing her chair back with a scrape. Then find someone else to play your games with, she snapped. But before she could storm out, his hand shot out, wrapping gently, but firmly, around her wrist. You can run if you want, he said softly, his voice like velvet over steel. But you'll come back. You already belong to me. You just don't know it yet. that night, she dreamed of him. Of his hands on her hips. Of his breath against her neck. Of his dark eyes, glinting with a promise she wasn't ready to understand. When she woke the next morning, her sheets were tangled and her heart was racing. The next few weeks blurred into a whirlwind. The surgery was set. Elior's mother trusted her completely. The staff at the mansion treated her like a queen, but their respect was nothing compared to Elior's relentless presence. He was everywhere. At the hospital, watching her work. At the mansion, leaning against the doorframe of whatever room she tried to hide in. In her dreams, where he refused to leave her alone. And little by little, her carefully constructed walls began to crack. One afternoon, after a long day at the hospital, she returned to the mansion to find the garden empty except for Elior, who was standing near the roses, his sleeves rolled and his tie gone. "You look tired," he remarked, watching her approach. "Long day," she admitted reluctantly. He nodded, then held out a single white rose. "For you," he said simply. She stared at it, suspicious. "What are you playing at?" He tilted his head, amused. "You think everything I do is a game," he murmured. "But not this. Not you." Against her better judgment, she took the rose, and when her fingers brushed his, her breath hitched. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as a doctor. Not as a burden. Not as a sister. Just her. But not everyone was blind to what was happening. Across the ocean, Cale sat in his office at the top of Varen Industries, his jaw tight and his hands clenched around the edge of his desk. Celine was speaking, but he barely heard her. Because on the screen of his tablet was a photo. Lyra. In Florence. Standing too close to a man he didn't recognize. A man whose hand was resting on her lower back, whose dark eyes seemed to claim her even through the photograph. Cale's stomach twisted. "Who is he?" he demanded. His assistant hesitated. "Elior Nightwind," the man finally said. "Owner of Nightwind Enterprises. Rumored to control a substantial portion of the underground market. Weapons, mines, even the Italian syndicates answer to him. Extremely powerful. Extremely dangerous." Cale's hands tightened further. "And why," he said coldly, "is he standing next to her?" The next day, Lyra was walking through a crowded piazza when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered anyway. "Hello?" The silence on the other end made her uneasy. Then, finally. "Lyra." Her breath caught. It was Cale. Her heart stuttered in her chest, but her voice remained steady. "What do you want?" she asked. "You need to come home," he said simply. She almost laughed. "I am home," she replied. "Don't play games with me," he snapped. "You shouldn't be there." "Not with him." Her eyes narrowed. "And why is that, Cale?" "Because you suddenly care?" The silence stretched between them. Then, quietly. "I've always cared." Her chest ached at the words, but it was too late. Before he could say more, she ended the call. That night, Elior appeared at her door, holding a glass of wine and wearing that infuriatingly knowing smirk. "You're quiet tonight," he said as he sat across from her. She didn't answer. Instead, she studied him in the firelight, trying to find something, anything, that would make her stop feeling this pull toward him. But there was nothing. Just him. All of him. And before she could think better of it, she whispered. "Why me?" Elior leaned back, swirling his wine. "Because you don't flinch," he said finally. "Because you don't bow. Because when everyone else looks at me with fear, you look at me like you don't care who I am, and it drives me mad." He set his glass down, his eyes locking on hers. "And because," he added softly, "the moment I saw you, I knew I'd burn down the world just to keep you." Her breath hitched. And in that moment, she knew. This was no longer a game. New moon, end of chapter 4. Chapter 5, Flames and Jealousy. Florence glowed that night, the city alive with lights, music, and the scent of summer roses. Lyra stood at the top of the grand staircase of yet another charity gala, dressed in a gown of midnight blue that shimmered like the ocean under moonlight. She hated these events, the endless smiles, the shallow conversations, but she endured them. That was what she'd learned to do, endure. Yet even as cameras flashed and strangers murmured her name, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her. Not just one pair. Two. On her left, Ellior Nightwind stood tall and dark in a tailored tuxedo, his presence commanding the room as easily as a king commands his court. He stayed close enough to make his claim known, but never so close as to be improper. A careful predator. And across the room, Cale. He'd come. She hadn't expected him, but perhaps she should have. Cale Varen was not a man who allowed things to slip from his fingers once he realized they mattered to him. But the way he was looking at her now, jaw tight, eyes burning, told her this was no business trip. Tonight wasn't about anyone but her. Careful, Ellior murmured in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. The way he's looking at you, he might start a war. Lyra stiffened but didn't move away. You're imagining things, she said quietly. No, Ellior replied, his tone soft but deadly. I'm seeing things very clearly. The first confrontation came sooner than she'd expected. She was slipping away from the crowd toward the balcony when Cale's voice stopped her. Lyra. Her heart jumped despite herself. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. Even now, he was impossibly handsome, sharp and cold in his tailored black suit, his dark hair perfectly in place, his gaze heavy with something she couldn't name. You shouldn't be here, he said finally. She arched a brow. Funny, I was about to say the same to you. He stepped closer, his expression dark. Come home, he said simply. She let out a quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it. Why, she asked. So you can look at me like I disgust you? So you can let her tear me apart while you stand there and say nothing? I've learned my lesson, Cale. I don't need saving anymore. Not from you. For a moment, his mask cracked, just a flicker, but it was enough. Is that what you think? He said hoarsely. That I didn't care? That I let you go because I didn't feel anything? Her breath caught, but she forced herself to stay still. Why are you really here, Cale? She whispered. But before he could answer, another voice cut in like a blade. I think she asked you a question, Ellior drawled from behind her. Cale's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. And for the first time, Lyra truly saw it, the two of them squaring off. Cale, all icy restraint and silent fury. Ellior. All dark danger and smoldering confidence. Both of them looking at her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. You, Cale said tightly, his gaze flicking to Ellior, should stay out of this. Ellior smirked lazily. I'd love to, believe me. But she's mine now. Lyra gasped softly, but Ellior didn't flinch. Cale's eyes darkened. She is not yours, Cale snapped. Ellior's smirk disappeared then, his expression turning lethal. Is that so? He murmured. Tell me, Varen, where were you when they tore her apart? When they whispered lies about her? When she walked out with nothing but a broken heart? You had your chance. You wasted it. Cale's hands curled into fists at his sides. Lyra felt her chest constrict, but before either of them could speak again, she stepped between them. That's enough, she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension like ice. Both men froze, their eyes still locked on each other, but they said nothing more. Later, after Cale stormed out, Ellior walked her to her car in silence. When they reached it, she finally turned to him. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. I know, he replied. Then why? He stepped closer, his eyes burning into hers. Because no one gets to hurt what's mine, he said simply. Her breath hitched. And what if I'm not yours, she whispered. For a moment, he said nothing. Then his lips curved into the faintest smile. Then I'll just have to change your mind. That night, she lay awake, her mind spinning. Elior's words haunted her. Cale's eyes followed her. But it was Elior's hands she imagined, steady and sure, promising things she wasn't ready to admit she wanted. Over the next weeks, Cale began appearing everywhere. At her hotel. At the hospital. Even at the mansion. Elior tolerated it, at first. But then came the day Cale cornered her at the hospital and grabbed her arm, his voice low but desperate. "I love you," he said. Lyra froze, her eyes wide. "You, what?" "I've always loved you," he admitted, his voice raw. "I didn't know it then. But I do now. Don't go back to him. Come home. With me." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. But before she could answer, a shadow fell over them both. Elior. And he did not look amused. His hand closed around Cale's wrist, prying it off her with casual strength. "If you want to keep that hand," Elior said softly, dangerously, "I suggest you don't touch her again." Cale's jaw clenched, but he didn't back down. "She doesn't belong to you," he shot back. Elior's dark eyes glinted. "She does now," he replied. That night, Elior didn't leave her side. When she tried to retreat to her room, he followed her in, closing the door behind him. "You're mine," he said quietly, his voice low and rough. "You can't just—" "I can," he interrupted. Her heart hammered in her chest as he stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame her face. "You think he can love you the way I do?" he asked softly. "You think he can protect you the way I will? He let you break. I'll put you back together." And then he kissed her. Hard, desperate, claiming. And to her horror, and her delight, she kissed him back. For the first time in years, she let herself fall. Not into Cale's cold shadow, but into Elior's flames. New moon, end of chapter 5. Chapter 6. The storm breaks. The air in Florence that evening was heavy, charged, as though the entire city could sense what was coming. Lyra stood by her bedroom window at the Nightwind estate, staring out at the endless gardens below. Her lips still tingled from Elior's kiss. Her heart still raced with the memory of his hands. But her mind was a battlefield. Because Cale was still there, waiting somewhere in the shadows, his confession haunting her. A knock on her door startled her. She opened it to find Elior standing there, his jacket slung over his shoulder, his tie already undone. "Come with me," he said simply. She blinked. "Where?" He didn't answer, just held out his hand. Against her better judgment, she took it. He led her to the garage, where a sleek black motorcycle was waiting. "Seriously?" she muttered. But he only smirked, handed her a helmet, and climbed on. "Hold on, Solace," he said over his shoulder. "Tight." And then they were flying down the winding roads of Tuscany, the city lights fading behind them, the wind tearing through her hair, her arms wrapped tightly around his solid frame. She couldn't help but laugh, breathless and wild, and for the first time in years, she felt free. They stopped at the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea. Elior dismounted, pulling off his helmet and raking a hand through his dark hair. "This is where I come when I need to think," he said quietly. Lyra slipped off the bike, hugging herself against the cool breeze. "And what are you thinking about tonight?" she asked. He turned to her then, and his eyes were dark, unguarded. "You," he admitted. Her breath caught. "Elior." But before she could say more, headlights flared behind them. A black car screeched to a halt, and Cale emerged, his jaw tight, his eyes wild. "Get away from her," he barked, his voice sharp enough to cut stone. Elior didn't even flinch. "I don't take orders from you," he replied lazily. Cale stalked closer, his hands fisted. "You think you can just steal her and parade her around like some trophy?" he demanded. "She's not a trophy," Elior said evenly. "She's everything. Something you were too blind to see." Lyra stepped back as the two men squared off, the storm between them finally breaking. "You don't deserve her," Cale snarled. "And you think you do?" Elliot countered, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Cale surged forward, shoving Elliot hard. Before Lyra could react, Elliot caught Cale by the collar, dragging him close enough that their foreheads nearly touched. "You don't get to touch me," Elliot hissed. "And you sure as hell don't get to touch her." Cale shoved back, and the two of them tumbled to the ground, fists flying, teeth bared. It wasn't just a fight. It was years of unspoken feelings, jealousy, regret, and rage finally erupting into the open. "Stop!" Lyra shouted, her voice cracking like a whip. Both men froze, breathing hard, their knuckles bloodied, their suits torn. She stepped between them, her eyes blazing. "I'm not some prize to be fought over," she snapped. "You don't get to decide who I belong to. I decide." Cale's chest heaved, his gaze fixed on her. "I love you," he said, his voice low, desperate. Elliot's dark eyes never left hers. "So do I," he murmured. For a long, tense moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Lyra closed her eyes, drawing in a shaky breath. When she opened them again, she knew. She turned to Cale first. "I waited for you," she said softly. "4 years. Even when you looked at me like I was nothing. Even when she made my life hell and you stood there and let it happen." Cale flinched. "You broke me," she continued, her voice steady. "And when I finally picked up the pieces, it wasn't you who helped me put them back together. It was him." Her gaze shifted to Elliot then, and something in his eyes softened, like the sun breaking through clouds. "You came into my life like a storm," she said. "And you terrified me. But you never let me fall. You never made me feel like I wasn't enough. You saw me." Elliot's lips curved into a faint smile, but it wasn't his usual smirk. It was something raw. Lyra reached for his hand. "And now," she finished, her voice quiet but sure, "I see you too." Cale's shoulders slumped, his eyes closing. When he opened them, there was nothing but resignation in them. "I was too late," he whispered. Lyra squeezed Elliot's hand tighter, her chest aching, but she didn't look away. "You were," she said simply. Cale straightened, his usual mask sliding back into place. Without another word, he turned and walked back to his car. As the engine roared to life and faded into the distance, Elliot finally spoke. "You chose me," he said softly, as though he still couldn't quite believe it. Lyra smiled faintly. "I did," she murmured. "So don't make me regret it." Elliot's arms came around her then, pulling her against him, his lips brushing her hair. "Never," he vowed. "You're mine now, Solace. And I'll burn down the whole damn world before I let you go." That night, under the stars and the scent of the sea, she let herself believe him. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't running anymore. She was home. New moon. End of chapter 6. Final chapter, Vows Under Fire. The wedding was nothing like Lyra expected. It wasn't a spectacle in Florence or a palace in Venice. It was quiet. Intimate. Bathed in golden sunlight at a cliffside villa overlooking the sea. The same cliff where she had chosen Elliot, and herself, months ago. She stood at the end of the aisle in a dress of ivory silk that clung to her like moonlight, her hair pinned with pearls, her eyes shining with more than just the reflection of the sun. At the other end of the aisle stood Elliot. Dressed in a black suit tailored to perfection, his tie discarded as usual, his dark hair ruffled by the wind, but his eyes. They were steady. Fierce. As though he'd been waiting his whole life for this one moment. When she finally reached him, he took her hands and didn't let go. The priest began to speak, but Lyra barely heard the words. All she saw was him. The man who came into her life like a storm. Who burned through her walls and stood between her and the whole damn world. Who looked at her as though she hung the stars in the sky. When it was time for their vows, Elliot surprised everyone by pulling a piece of crumpled paper from his pocket, and then immediately tossing it aside. I was going to read something, he said roughly. But nothing I wrote was enough. His thumb brushed over the back of her hand, and his voice dropped so only she could hear. You're it for me, solace. The one thing I never knew I needed until I couldn't live without it. You're not just my love, you're my fire. My reason. The only person in this world who scares the hell out of me, and the only one I'd burn it all down for. Always. You're mine. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered her own vow back. And you're mine, she said. Not because you broke down my walls, but because you made me want to step outside of them. You saw me when no one else did. And you loved me even when I didn't know how to love myself. Always. You're mine. When they kissed, the world fell away, and for the first time, Lyra felt truly, completely whole. That night, after the guests left and the stars came out, Elior carried her to their bedroom, and made good on every promise he'd ever made her, with his hands, his lips, and his heart. She fell asleep in his arms, the sound of the sea outside their window, and woke to find his arms still around her, his dark eyes watching her like she was still his most dangerous addiction. First quarter moon epilogue, Scars and Stars. 3 years later. The villa was quiet except for the faint laughter of a small boy playing in the garden. Lyra watched from the kitchen window as Elior chased their son around the roses, both of them barefoot, the air warm and sweet. She smiled faintly, her hand resting on her belly, now just beginning to show the curve of their second child. When Elior finally scooped their boy into his arms and carried him inside, his eyes found hers instantly. Even after all this time, that look still made her breath catch. You should be resting, he said, kissing her temple as he set their son down. I am, she replied, smiling. Just watching my 2 favorite boys. Elior leaned down to press a kiss to her lips, slow and reverent. And you'll always have us, he murmured. Far away, in a high-rise office overlooking another city, Cale stood alone by his window, a glass of whiskey in hand. He'd heard about the wedding. He'd seen the photos of their son. He'd even seen the quiet announcement of their second child. And though his chest still ached, though he still dreamed of what might have been, he never called. Never came. Because he knew. He'd lost her the moment he let her walk away. And Elior had been man enough not to. That night, as Lyra and Elior lay curled together in their bed, her head on his chest, his hand splayed over her stomach, she whispered into the dark. Do you ever regret it? Choosing me? Elior let out a low laugh, tightening his hold on her. Every damn day, he said. She stiffened, lifting her head to glare at him, but his smirk was already in place. I regret I didn't find you sooner, he finished, brushing his thumb over her cheek. You're impossible, she muttered, but her smile betrayed her. And yet, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair, you love me anyway. I do, she whispered. Good, he murmured back. Because I plan to spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice. And outside their window, the stars burned bright, as though the universe itself agreed. Sparkles the end.